simple fishermen raised the Titanic from the depths of the ocean 113 years later, but what they discovered in the sealed section shocks the whole world. Subscribe to not miss the next part and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The wind carried the sharp scent of salt across the quiet harbor as dawn pushed its pale light over the horizon. The sea looked calm, deceptively so, as if pretending to sleep before another restless day began. In the small fishing town of Port Hamilton, mornings always started the same way. The clatter of crates, the churning of old engines, and the steady determination of men who depended on the ocean more than they ever wanted to admit. Among them stood Marcus Johnson, wiping the sleep from his eyes as he stepped onto the deck of his aging vessel. The Annabelle wasn't much to look at. Weather-beaten wood, rust crawling along its metal fittings, and machinery that groaned with every task. But to Marcus, it was more than a boat. It was his inheritance, his last tie to his father, the legacy of a family that had always turned to the sea when life on land grew too heavy. His father used to say the ocean wasn't a friend or an enemy, just a force. Respect it, and it might let you live another day. Turn your back on it, and it would swallow you whole without a trace. Marcus had been fighting to hold on to this boat for years. Bills stacked like storm clouds on the kitchen table. The bank's calls came more frequently than rain. His mother's medication costs rose each season, and 2 growing children needed more than promises to fill their plates. Every time the engine coughed, he wondered whether one day it simply wouldn't wake again. Losing the boat meant losing everything he could still claim as his own. He paused at the wheel, staring toward the open sea. There was no choice today. He had to come back with enough catch to make a payment that would keep the creditors from tightening their grip around his neck. He tried to swallow that thought down, but it sat like a stone in his gut. The crew shuffled aboard with tired expressions. Darrell, big and broad-shouldered, carried himself with the ease of someone who could sleep standing if the waves allowed it. Jamal, younger than Marcus by almost a decade, never stopped quietly humming as he worked, like music might keep bad luck from noticing him. They greeted their captain with nods, no dramatic words necessary in the silence of morning. Each man knew the stakes. Marcus checked that the nets were secured and the cooler prepared. Finally, he powered up the old sonar system. The screen flickered, lines of static cutting through the display before it steadied enough to be trusted. Years ago, he had taken a heavy loan just to install that sonar. It was his one gamble against the endless uncertainty of the sea. When it worked, it found fish where others swore emptiness. When it didn't, he was no better than a blind man feeling his way in a dark cave. He eased the throttle forward, pushing the Annabelle through the harbor channel. The coastline slipped away behind them as sunlight brushed the tops of gentle swells. Jamal began coiling lines and setting up the hold. Darrell prepared the nets. Marcus forced himself to focus on the work in front of him, but the weight in his chest pulsed with every thought of overdue bills. Hours passed with little luck. The sonar showed shapes too small to chase and clusters of promising readings that vanished the moment they lowered their nets. Marcus tried not to let frustration show, but he could feel the anxious glances from the other 2. They all counted on him, on his instincts, on the decisions he made steering this vessel. Confidence was as vital as diesel, even when you pretended to have more of it than you actually did. He wiped sweat from his forehead, staring at the sonar again. The screen pulsed steadily, until something unexpected wavered at the edge of the scan, a large mass, unmoving, too large for a school of tuna, too defined to be just rock. Marcus blinked, tapped the screen lightly, as if the machine needed encouragement. The shape remained. "Darryl, come here a second," he said. The big man lumbered over, squinted at the display. "That's a funny formation." "It's not a formation," Marcus murmured. The object lay deep, far deeper than they would normally target, resting near the bottom like a sleeping giant. Marcus adjusted their course, curiosity now pulling stronger than any hope of fish. Jamal joined them, eyes widening as the mass appeared clearer with each pass. "What do you think it is?" Jamal asked. "Could be a ship," Marcus said quietly. "Wrecks get reported," Darryl replied. "Nobody mentioned something that big around here." Marcus didn't answer at first. The screen showed smooth, long lines, unnatural lines, metal, structure, something manufactured, not carved by the ocean. He entered the coordinates into his log. His heart thudded faster, not from fear, but from possibility. It had been a long time since he felt anything close to excitement. There were rules out here, unspoken but understood. If you found something, you checked it out. The ocean could provide more than fish, and sometimes one discovery could change a man's life. But he knew better than to count his blessings before he saw them with his own eyes. They moved on, trying to capture fish elsewhere, though his focus kept drifting back to the numbers he had written down. The further they traveled from that spot, the more it pulled at him like a magnet. By twilight, when the day's catch still barely filled half a crate, Marcus made up his mind. He steered back toward the coordinates. The sun dipped lower, setting the water aflame with reflected orange. The deeper they traveled, the darker the sea beneath became. Again, the sonar flickered to life with a massive shape looming at the bottom. There was no mistake now. Something enormous rested out there, untouched, forgotten by the world above. "Could be worth a fortune," Jamal whispered. "Could be nothing but trouble," Darryl countered. Marcus didn't reply. Both possibilities felt equally true. The crew silently watched him for a decision. If he turned away, the mystery would stay buried forever, and tomorrow would be just another day of struggling against a losing battle. But if he stayed, maybe fate wasn't done with him yet. He radioed the harbor authorities, keeping his voice low and calm, trying not to reveal the trembling under his ribs. He gave the coordinates again, this time with certainty. The response was lukewarm. A board operator promising to pass the message along, but Marcus could hear the disbelief under every word. Routine fishing boats didn't stumble onto history. They caught sardines, or they caught nothing. The tension aboard his boat thickened with the coming night. The sky turned lavender, then deep blue laced with cold stars. Marcus locked the coordinates into his mind one final time. There would be a next step. He could feel it as surely as tides pulled at the shore. Maybe tomorrow someone would take his report seriously. Maybe the world would come looking. Maybe what lay beneath the waves would finally rise again. And if that happened, Marcus promised himself he wouldn't be brushed aside like a nobody. He had found it. He knew what he saw. He wouldn't let anyone rob him of this chance. He stared out across the darkening water, unsure if the tremor in his hands was fear or anticipation. The ocean stretched endlessly before him, vast and silent, except for that invisible giant resting in its depths. For the first time in a long while, Marcus felt something crack through the layers of exhaustion and struggle. Hope. Dangerous, fragile hope. He didn't sleep that night. He kept imagining the shape beneath the sea, wondering how long it had slept there and why fate had guided him directly above it. Morning would come soon, and with it decisions that would change everything. He couldn't see them yet, but they were waiting just ahead, like the first glimmer of breaking light. Marcus looked up at the stars and tightened his grip on the wheel of the Annabelle. Whatever secrets the deep was holding, he was determined to bring at least one of them to the surface. And so the sea kept its silence, as if considering whether Marcus Johnson was worthy of the truth buried in its cold embrace. The sun rose with a pale shimmer the next morning, but Marcus barely noticed. He had not slept, pacing the deck long after his crew went below to rest. The coordinates he logged felt like glowing embers in his mind. Each time he closed his eyes, he saw that massive silhouette on the sonar, unmoving, unnatural, impossible to dismiss. As the sky lightened into shades of pink and gold, he remained at the wheel, steering the Annabelle back toward the harbor. The voyage home passed in a blur of restless thoughts. Upon docking, he filed a more formal report with the harbor office. His voice remained steady as he explained the size and shape of the object, the depth, the potential significance. The clerk on duty gave him a tired look, as if this was nothing more than another fisherman exaggerating to get attention. Marcus didn't push the issue. He simply handed over the coordinates and left, telling himself that once someone saw what he saw, everything would change. He headed home in the soft morning haze, but exhaustion finally caught up with him. He barely made it inside his front door before collapsing onto the couch. His wife, Aisha, glanced at the dark circles beneath his eyes and asked if it had been a hard night on the water. He only murmured that he'd explain later. He drifted into a heavy sleep filled with strange dreams of rusted railings and grand staircases sinking into darkness. When he awoke, the sun was climbing high, and the smell of frying fish drifted in from the kitchen. His body ached, but the urgency inside him had not faded. He sat down at the table, describing what he had discovered and what he believed it might be. His wife listened quietly, a crease forming between her brows. She wanted to believe him. Truly, she did. But their lives had been a string of disappointments. How many times had the ocean tempted them with hope, only to leave them worse off? Still, she placed a hand on his and said that if he trusted what he'd seen, she did too. It was the closest thing to encouragement he could hope for. Their children ran through the house, unaware of the storm of possibility brewing in their father's heart. By early afternoon, Marcus was back at the harbor, drawn like a tide to the sea. He expected to be ignored again, perhaps even laughed at. Instead, he found two men in windbreakers waiting near his boat. They introduced themselves as marine researchers from the state university, saying they'd been forwarded his coordinates by the harbor authorities. Their equipment was loaded into a van, a high-resolution sonar, underwater cameras, and a remotely operated vehicle that looked like a mechanical crab with bright yellow armor. Marcus couldn't hide his surprise. The older of the two researchers, Dr. Whitaker, gave him a brief, businesslike smile. He had the look of a man who'd spent too many years in academia. Tired eyes, a mind constantly trying to balance skepticism and discovery. The younger one, an enthusiastic assistant named Leon, seemed barely able to contain his excitement. He peppered Marcus with questions before they even set foot on the boat. Daryl and Jamal arrived soon after, exchanging glances with Marcus as if to ask what sort of trouble or opportunity he had stirred up. The boat that had once been dismissed by officials suddenly felt like the center of something important. They set off again toward the coordinates, the sea calm beneath a hazy sky. Marcus watched the shoreline fade behind them and felt his pulse quicken. The researchers wasted no time in assembling their gear, cables running across the deck like veins. Whitaker stood by Marcus, asking him to recount every detail of the sonar sighting from the night before. Marcus answered patiently, though he could tell the man wasn't convinced yet. Scientists, he realized, trusted evidence more than intuition. Once they reached the spot, Marcus slowed the vessel and held it steady. Whitaker activated the high-resolution sonar. The image took shape slowly, lines and shadows emerging on the screen like a ghost rising from the deep. Leon leaned forward, his jaw falling slack. Darrell muttered a low curse, and Jamal crossed himself even though he rarely set foot in a church. The mass beneath them appeared larger and clearer than Marcus ever saw in his old system. A long structure, deck lines, a bow that tapered into the darkness. This was a ship, and not just any ship. Leon adjusted the sonar range, and there it was, a curved railing, bright and distinct under the scanning waves. Then a shape near the bow, faint but unmistakable. Raised lettering. The darkness made it hard to decipher, but as the resolution sharpened, letters materialized. RMS. No one spoke. The air felt suddenly colder. Leon captured a still image and enhanced the contrast. More letters surfaced, rough but legible. Titanic, Doctor. Whitaker exhaled as if struck in the chest. His fingers shook when he removed his glasses and wiped them on his shirt. This can't be," he whispered. "The wreck is supposed to be much farther north, and fragmented, half buried." Marcus stared at him. "Then what's this?" Whitaker had no answer. His disbelief only made the truth more staggering. Leon prepared the underwater drone for deployment. As it descended, it passed through the dimming layers of seawater until the cameras captured the faint glow of settled silt drifting along the ocean floor. The ship materialized slowly out of the murk. Rails draped in coral, windows shattered and dark, an enormous hull resting like a corpse in a tomb of silent water. It was too intact for a vessel that had supposedly broken in two. Too preserved for something lost to the deep for more than a century. Questions swarmed like schooling fish. How had it stayed hidden? Why here? Why in this condition? Marcus barely breathed. He had discovered something that should have been impossible. A ship known to the entire world. A tragedy burned into history books and memorial plaques. And yet, here it was, lying forgotten in the depths. They guided the drone along the starboard side, watching century-old steel loom past like a dead whale. Ribbons of seaweed fluttered where passengers once strolled under the glow of chandeliers. The camera paused on a collapsed lifeboat davit, haunting evidence of the chaos that unfolded above so long ago. Whitaker recorded every frame, his voice unsteady as he dictated observations. He said the depth and orientation made no sense based on documented accounts. This discovery threatened more than historical records. It threatened to rewrite them. They surfaced the drone hours later, each of them silent as Marcus turned the boat back toward port. The sunset smeared the horizon with bruised purple and gold, and the water rippled softly around them, as if trying to swallow their secret again. No one dared discuss what came next until they stepped onto the dock. Whitaker made a call to someone with authority, his voice tight and controlled. The guarded tone told Marcus everything he needed to know. This was about to grow far beyond a fisherman's find. Journalists came first, local reporters eager for a headline, then regional media, microphones pointed like weapons, cameras reflected Marcus's uneasy expression back at him. He struggled to form sentences that didn't sound like wild claims. When asked how he felt, his answer was simple and honest. "I don't know yet." That night, television anchors spoke his name alongside a word that echoed across the world. Titanic. His neighbors stared at him in newfound awe. Some offered congratulations. Others looked at him as if he had disturbed something that should have been left alone. Aisha held his hand tightly as helicopters thundered overhead toward the harbor. And then the officials arrived. Research vessels with flags of multiple nations, teams of engineers and historians, lawyers dressed in suits that seemed absurdly out of place on salty docks. They carried folders thick with contracts and rights claims. They asked Marcus questions he couldn't answer, demanded signatures that would strip him of influence before anything was even recovered. He recognized the shift immediately. This was no longer his discovery. It was becoming theirs. They allowed him to watch from the sidelines, a spectator in his own story. Daryl and Jamal were asked to step aside as well, quietly told they would be informed when their presence was necessary. Cameras captured the excitement of an unprecedented find, but barely mentioned the man who had found it. Marcus stood near the barricades one evening, staring at the lights glittering across the water. The harbor had transformed into a fortress. Every move controlled, every detail classified. Plans to begin a large-scale operation to examine and recover parts of the wreck were already underway, yet none of that erased what he had seen. The Titanic, a name that haunted the ocean, was real again. And it had surfaced because he found it. He refused to let them erase him. Not this time. He had fought too long, lost too much, to let the world pretend he was only a footnote in someone else's history. Whatever this discovery revealed, whatever truths it forced into daylight, Marcus Johnson would be there when it happened. The sea had chosen him to uncover a legend, and he wasn't done yet. The harbor that once felt like a quiet refuge now buzzed with constant noise. Massive vessels crowded the water, cranes swung overhead, and voices barked orders in different accents and languages. It had been only a few days since the discovery became public, but the entire coastline seemed transformed into a command center built around the wreck lying far beneath the waves. The Annabelle looked small and forgotten between the towering steel hulls, yet Marcus remained fierce in his determination not to fade into the background. Officials continued to monitor and restrict his participation, insisting that safety protocols and international ownership disputes demanded a formal structure. Marcus understood that meant power, and he had none. But he wasn't about to disappear. He made sure to show up every morning, standing at the perimeter of restricted zones with his arms folded, watching everything. If anyone asked why he was there, he simply said he was the one who found the ship and deserved to see what became of it. As the weeks passed, the operation escalated. Scientists and engineers held meetings in glass-walled conference rooms aboard research vessels. Marcus wasn't invited to these meetings, but he caught bits of conversation from those walking ashore. Every day, more equipment was hauled out onto the open sea. Submersibles, winches designed to handle massive weights, steel cables thicker than a man's wrist. Rumors circulated that a specific part of the wreck was being targeted for recovery, something in the central hull, something not shown in historical blueprints. It was not long before he overheard enough to understand the heart of this mission was a hidden section, a sealed part of the Titanic no one had ever spoken of, not in documentaries, books, or records. Dr. Whitaker, once cautious but intrigued, confirmed that the first scans revealed a reinforced compartment unlike anything seen in passenger liners from the era. Its construction was deliberate, armored, as if protecting something of immense value. The more Marcus learned, the more restless he became. Every instinct told him this wasn't just about preserving history. It was about retrieving something powerful enough that governments were willing to spend millions and take control overnight. He found himself thinking about that sense of wrongness he'd felt the first night. How something that massive could lie hidden for so long, untouched and intact, and why the operators constantly argued behind closed doors about access and ownership rather than exploration and research. One late afternoon, Marcus encountered Whitaker near the dock, hunched over a pile of printed sonar maps. The scientist's eyes were tired, his posture stiff from too many sleepless nights. Marcus asked him quietly what they expected to find. Whitaker hesitated, glancing around to ensure no one overheard, then leaned closer and admitted that some believed the section might have been added specifically to transport valuables. Wealthy passengers, bankers, aristocrats, all of whom had boarded the Titanic with not only their lives, but also their fortunes. Marcus had heard legends about passengers carrying diamonds, gold, and priceless artifacts, but those were stories, whispered over beer in fading pubs. What Whitaker described was something far more calculated, a vault. A vault within one of the most renowned ships ever built, hidden behind secrecy and steel. It didn't make the tragedy any less horrific. If anything, it darkened it. The Titanic hadn't only been a symbol of luxury and innovation, it had been a vessel of greed carrying more than human dreams across the ocean, and now someone wanted that vault open. Soon, work shifted offshore. The first attempt to lift the armored compartment nearly failed. Marcus watched from his boat as divers and submersibles descended, their lights cutting through the dark water. The ocean roiled with apprehension when the first lifting cables strained under unimaginable weight. The segment of the hull, stubborn and cold, refused to rise gracefully. It groaned like a beast being dragged from its grave, shedding small fragments that floated sullenly to the shimmering surface. When the attempt failed, the engineers regrouped. They reinforced the cables, added stabilizing frames, and recalculated their approach. It struck Marcus how quickly money changed hands when wealthy nations united behind a secret. Whole cranes were brought in as replacements before the old ones had even cooled. The operation seemed limitless in funding, an obvious sign there was more at stake than researchers would ever admit. Marcus stayed vigilant. News teams focused their cameras on the impressive machinery, but he kept his eyes on the faces of those in charge. Every narrowed gaze and hurried whisper told him that not a single decision was being made for public benefit. The world celebrated the recovery as an archaeological triumph. The men calling the shots saw it as something far more profitable. Finally, on a calm morning when the water gleamed like polished steel, they tried again. Marcus stood on the deck of the Annabelle, gripping the rails as if the entire ocean might shift beneath him. A deep, guttural vibration hummed across the waves as the tension increased. Cables tautened, winches screeched, and the sea itself seemed to resist. But inch by inch, the section rose. Silt and rust cascaded in dark clouds as sunlight touched metal not seen by human eyes since the night the Titanic vanished into the abyss. Everyone on the water held their breath. The reinforced compartment surfaced, black, ridged, monstrous, like the ribcage of some ancient leviathan. It looked nothing like the elegant ship that had once carried the hopes of a gilded age. It was a vault. A secret bunker forged into the Titanic's core, hidden beneath the grand designs and luxury suites. Marcus felt a chill crawl up his spine as he stared at it. Against the gray sky, the structure resembled a coffin, sealed tight by rust and time. He imagined the roaring chaos on that fateful night, the creak of splitting steel, the screams, the freezing water swallowing light. And beneath all that turmoil, this chamber had remained untouched, silent and cold, preserving whatever purpose it had served. The compartment was transferred with meticulous care onto a floating platform fitted out like a high-security lab. Layers of protective equipment were strapped around it to prevent structural collapse. No one said the word vault, but the meaning was obvious. Dr. Whitaker avoided eye contact with Marcus as he supervised, which only affirmed that this discovery had become something more than scientific exploration. Guards, actual armed guards, were posted at the platform's perimeter. Their presence made Marcus's jaw tighten. He wasn't naive. He had lived in a world where people like him were expected to hand over miracles to those already rich enough to own everything else. A few hours later, a meeting was called aboard one of the larger vessels, the kind that housed luxury suites disguised as work cabins. Marcus wasn't invited, but through the glass windows he could see silhouettes arguing beneath glaring white lights. He recognized some of the suits: banking representatives, diplomats, experts in maritime law, even a royal-looking figure whose identity Marcus couldn't place. Their stance and gestures radiated entitlement. A titan of greed had awakened. Whitaker eventually left the meeting, shoulders sagging under the weight of knowledge he couldn't voice. When their eyes met across the deck, Marcus knew instinctively that Whitaker wanted to speak, but couldn't. Not here, not yet. The researcher gave a small nod, a promise that they'd talk soon, privately. That night, the harbor felt more suffocating than ever before. The moon cast pale glimmers on the water as Marcus stood alone on the Annabelle, staring at the silhouettes of enormous ships that dwarfed his own. The ocean whispered beneath him, the same ancient whisper his father once taught him to hear. Trust the deep. It holds more truth than men ever will. The reinforced chamber lay secured just a few hundred yards away, waiting to reveal its secrets. Marcus had never feared the unknown, but the known, the greed of powerful men, terrified him far more. As he gazed out across the dark water, he knew the real struggle had only begun. He had found the Titanic, unearthed something buried by time and tragedy. But now that truth was slipping from his hands, devoured by those who believed the world already belonged to them. He clenched his fists, refusing to let despair drown him. Whatever the vault held, he was not going to let it remain a secret. He had found the path to this moment by pure instinct, defying every obstacle stacked against him, and he would continue to fight, even if the entire world tried to push him aside. The ocean had delivered the first revelation. What came next would shape not only Marcus's life, but history itself. The vault was rising from the deep, and with it, everything humanity once thought it knew about the Titanic was about to change. But before the truth could surface completely, powerful men aimed to seize it. And Marcus, whether he liked it or not, was now entangled in their battle. He looked once more at the spot where the vault had emerged, then towards the stars above. Each shimmer felt like a silent witness. Tomorrow they would open that chamber, and answers long buried in cold darkness would see daylight again. Marcus intended to be there when they did. The floating platform that held the sealed section of the Titanic had become the most guarded and scrutinized place on the entire coastline. Floodlights glared down upon it day and night, leaving no shadow deep enough for secrets. Waves lapped gently at the pontoons beneath, as if the ocean itself was trying to reclaim what had been stolen from its depths. Marcus stood on the deck of the Annabelle, observing the commotion from a distance. His boat rocked lightly with the swell, a stark contrast to the rigid posture of guards stationed on the platform. The reinforced chamber, hauled from those freezing depths days earlier, rested under tarps and scaffolding, encased like a treasure too precious to expose. Yet the very way they hovered around it revealed that its true nature was not treasure, but danger, knowledge, leverage. They wanted what was inside not to celebrate the past, but to manipulate the present. As dawn broke over the horizon, the engineers began preparing to cut into the steel. Marcus watched welders assemble their tools, sparks showering the deck like fleeting stars. Thick cables connected power supplies to the machinery, humming with raw energy. Officials clustered on the decks of nearby vessels, clutching clipboards and tablets. Marcus noticed how the same tension gripped them all, anticipation entwined with fear. They knew the vault could hold answers to questions no one had dared ask for a century. Answers that might expose dark dealings, ruin legacies, shift power structures. They also knew that once opened, there was no turning back. Marcus walked along the pier trying to find Whitaker. He had seen the man slip away from the crowd earlier, his face pale beneath the morning light. After searching among the supply crates and cables, Marcus finally spotted him sitting alone on a metal step, staring at the ocean. The scientist's posture was slumped, his hands clasped tightly together as though holding an invisible weight. "Are you all right?" Marcus asked, taking a seat beside him. Whitaker exhaled slowly. "I'm just thinking about what comes next. This is not archaeology anymore. It's something far more dangerous." Marcus studied him. "You know something." Whitaker hesitated, then nodded, his eyes fixed on the shifting water. "Some of the documents recovered during preliminary scans. They weren't just personal belongings. They referenced transactions between some of the most powerful banking families of the era, deals hidden even from their own partners, and that's only from fragments we retrieved by accident." He glanced toward the platform. "What's inside that vault will rewrite history." "Rewrite it how?" Marcus pressed. Whitaker lifted his gaze. "By revealing what people with power were willing to do to hold on to it, and how far that willingness might have gone." Marcus felt a chill ripple through him. If the vault contained records of secret deals, then those who controlled this operation now would want them hidden, or at least kept out of the wrong hands. He suddenly understood why guards stood watch with more vigilance than soldiers at a national border. These weren't caretakers of history. They were gatekeepers of a legacy written with greed and fear. By late morning, the cut-in began. The shrill scream of industrial saws echoed across the water. Sparks rained down in golden arcs. The old steel, thickened by decades of corrosion, resisted at first. The hull vibrated under each assault, groaning as the modern world forced itself into a space built in another era. Marcus leaned forward on the rail, unable to look away. The sight was hypnotic, a meeting of centuries, one trying to break open the secrets of the other. As the first panel fell away, a cloud of stale, pressurized air hissed through the opening. It smelled ancient, metallic, and suffocating, as though the ocean itself had been holding its breath inside the chamber for more than 100 years. The workers stepped back, giving the toxic fumes time to escape. When it was safe to proceed, a team with respirators moved in, directing lights through the newly cut aperture. Marcus saw their faces change almost instantly. Shock, awe, confusion, fear, like explorers stepping into a forgotten tomb. He pushed closer, even though he knew he wasn't allowed past the barrier. The guards noticed and stepped in his path, but he could see just enough through the gaps in their formation to witness the truth. The interior of the vault was immaculate. Time had failed to corrode it. Water had never touched it. It looked as though it had been sealed only days ago, not more than a century. Rows of massive steel trunks lined the walls, each strapped securely into place. Some trunks bore the crests of noble families. Others displayed emblems of banking houses that had shaped entire economies. These were not mere luggage pieces. They were treasure chests designed to survive catastrophe. Marcus felt his breath catch in his throat. He imagined the wealthy passengers, bankers, barons, titans of industry, boarding the Titanic with their fortunes in tow. He imagined them expecting to arrive in America with more power than they had possessed in Europe. And now those fortunes lay untouched, suspended in time, hidden in darkness until this very moment. Teams of archivists and security personnel moved swiftly, photographing everything before disturbing a single item. They recorded each trunk, each seal, each symbol etched into the metal. One emblem caught Marcus's eye, a crown above an ornate shield. He didn't know its exact origin, but he had seen it before on documentaries about European aristocracies that had long since faded, but left behind descendants who still wielded power in the shadows of governments and financial empires. If the contents of these trunks were ever made public, many of those families would be exposed as architects of corruption, exploitation, or worse. The workers carefully pried open the first trunk. The sound of the latch breaking reverberated like a gunshot. Inside, nestled in reinforced compartments, were velvet-lined cases filled with diamonds of impossible clarity, strands of pearls the size of marbles, gold bars stamped with mint marks from different nations. But even more compelling were the paper envelopes, sealed with wax insignias, now brittle and faded. Whitaker pushed closer to examine them, his hands trembling slightly. These envelopes contained correspondences, contracts, and confidential notes. They were written testimony of financial maneuvers that had shaped the dawn of the 20th century. Another trunk revealed caskets of gemstones. Another held documents bearing the ornate signatures of tycoons known throughout history. Yet another contained stock certificates, bonds, and agreements that indicated a vast exchange of wealth, perhaps even plans for international collusion. When the archivists opened a particularly heavy trunk, they discovered a collection of small personal safes belonging to individual passengers. Each bore a nameplate: dukes, viscounts, industrial heirs, heiresses, shipping magnates. Some safes had been damaged in the fall, yet remained sealed. Others were pristine. Whitaker picked up one safe with particular care. Its lock was ornate, crafted with an intricate mechanism. The name engraved on the plate was one Marcus recognized instantly, a family so influential that their crest still adorned skyscrapers on 3 continents. If any secrets inside were revealed, they could topple an empire built across generations. Whitaker placed the safe on a table, his face solemn. "These were never meant to be found," he said softly. "Not like this." Marcus felt the truth of that settle over him like a suffocating cloth. Everything inside this vault had been meticulously protected. This meant the people who arranged its construction knew exactly what kind of catastrophic event it would need to survive. And they were right. The Titanic sank, but their secrets didn't. Beyond the trunks and safes, another discovery awaited in the far end of the chamber, a row of heavy built-in banking vault doors. Marcus had never seen anything like them on a passenger ship, and neither had any of the historians present. They were reinforced, thicker than anything used for personal storage. These were institutional vaults belonging to major banks of the era. Their surfaces bore etched logos and serial numbers. Some belonged to banks that no longer existed, having merged or collapsed over the decades. Others still thrived today. All of them were sealed. The room buzzed with tense excitement. The decision about how to open the large vaults required immediate consultation. Lawyers and officials swarmed the area, arguing over jurisdiction and ownership. National representatives made calls to embassies and ministries. Banking officials whispered frantically, calculating damage control strategies. The very air vibrated with the sense that the world was about to witness something monumental and dangerous. Marcus stood at the edge of the platform, gripping the railing so hard his knuckles ached. He wanted to step inside to see it all up close, but the guards wouldn't allow it. Still, he watched every detail, absorbing the scene as if he were imprinting it into his memory forever. He knew that once these contents were officially cataloged and locked behind bureaucratic decisions, the truth might never see daylight again. Powerful forces were already circling like predators, seeking to bury this discovery beneath layers of legal ownership claims. They needed to control the narrative. They needed to control him, too. During a brief lull in the commotion, Whitaker approached Marcus again. His face looked conflicted, as though weighed down by guilt. "What's inside this vault," he whispered, "is more than history. It's leverage. It can change economies, rewrite political alliances, tarnish dynasties. Some people would do anything to keep it buried." Marcus felt a knot form in his stomach. "Do you think they'll hide it?" Whitaker's silence was enough. As the day stretched toward evening, golden light spilled over the platform, illuminating the artifacts spread across tables. The scene looked like an open-air museum of greed and grandeur. But none of it felt like victory. Instead, it felt like opening Pandora's box, an intrusion into something that was never meant to be disturbed. The ocean breeze chilled as the sun dipped lower. The workers began packaging trunks for transport to secure facilities. Guards tightened their positions. Officials tried to maneuver control over every aspect of the operation. The platform became a battlefield of competing interests, each person convinced they had the right to the truth, or the power to suppress it. Marcus observed it all with growing dread. He knew now that his discovery had not just awakened history, it had awakened the people who profited from it. And those people would not hesitate to silence anyone threatening their narrative. He stepped back onto the Annabelle, glancing once more at the vault. The image remained burned into his mind. Its walls of steel, its treasure of secrets, and the specter of something buried deep not only in the ocean, but in the conscience of humanity. The truth had been sealed for over a century, and now that it had risen from the deep, the struggle to control it had begun. Marcus had no idea how dark that struggle would become. The atmosphere around the harbor shifted from anticipation to aggression almost overnight. The first thrill of discovery, the awe that accompanied the vault's opening, had burned away, leaving only the cold, hungry glare of power. The floating platform that held the recovered trunks no longer resembled an archaeological site. It had become the stage of a covert war fought with legal jargon, guarded whispers, and quiet threats. Marcus watched it unfold with widening eyes, realizing that he had stepped into something far larger than he ever imagined, something that could crush him if he didn't tread carefully. After the initial cataloging of the trunks and smaller safes, a committee of international representatives met aboard one of the larger research vessels docked offshore. Marcus had hoped, naively, that he would be invited. Instead, he stood along the barricaded edge of the harbor while lawyers argued inside under the fluorescent lights. Flags of nations flapped wildly in the wind, but the supposed unity symbolized by those colors meant nothing here. The nations were not cooperating. They were circling each other like sharks sensing blood in the water. Everyone wanted a claim. Everyone wanted control. Days stretched into a tense pattern. Meetings, press briefings, arguments, reports of court filings, and emergency injunctions cluttered every news cycle. Even journalists grew frustrated as officials refused to disclose what exactly had been recovered before the vault doors were sealed again. The world saw glimpses, photographs of gold bars, pearls, ornate lockboxes, but the documents remained hidden from public view. It was as if history itself was under arrest. Marcus noticed the shift in how people looked at him. Reporters crowded him one day, shoving microphones into his face, asking how he felt about discovering something so monumental. They used words like hero, pioneer, revolutionizer. But the next day, when the suits and bankers arrived, everything changed. Now the cameras pointed elsewhere. Now his name was no longer mentioned in official statements. His face disappeared from screens. He had become invisible again. He confronted one of the port officials, demanding to know why he was being shut out, and received only a sympathetic shrug in return. "It's no longer in the hands of small operators," the woman admitted, as though his entire life could be neatly dismissed in that phrase. She reminded him, politely but firmly, that salvage rights were complicated, that jurisdiction over historic wrecks was a battlefield of international maritime law, and he was just a fisherman. But he knew better. Without him, the Titanic would still be sleeping in the abyss, its secrets safe from the world. He was more than a spectator. He was the reason this was all happening, and now they wanted to erase him from his own story. That night, Marcus returned home with his nerves frayed and his head ringing from unanswered questions. Aisha listened as he poured out his frustrations. She held him as he spoke, her presence the only thing anchoring him from the chaos that threatened to overwhelm him. He felt a desperate need to protect his family, to shield them from the storm he had accidentally unleashed. But he also knew that retreating now would mean surrendering everything he had fought for, the chance to matter, to rise above the ruin that poverty and circumstance had heaped onto his shoulders year after year. The next morning, Whitaker found Marcus waiting at the docks again. The scientist's expression was strained, as though he too had been wrestling with conscience. He asked Marcus to take a walk with him away from prying eyes, toward the quieter end of the harbor where stacks of unused fishing nets and dusty crates created shadows deep enough for secret conversations. "They're trying to bury the truth," Whitaker said before Marcus could even speak. His voice was low, tight with anger. "Everything that could rewrite what we know about that time period, about those men, the documents are being moved to private vaults. Not museums, not archives. Private vaults. That should tell you everything." Marcus stared at him. "Why? They already have everything they could want. Why hide it?" Whitaker shook his head. "Some of those agreements in the trunks, if they were exposed, they would implicate families and financial institutions that still hold enormous influence today. And the truth could topple entire dynasties. There are men alive who would do anything to stop that from happening." Marcus felt the dock sway beneath him. "They'll get away with it, won't they?" "Not if someone stops them," Whitaker replied, stepping closer. "You have a voice. You're the reason this was found. People are still listening to you right now, even if the authorities pretend otherwise." Marcus wasn't sure he believed that, but Whitaker pressed on, eager to share what had been haunting him. "There's more," he whispered. The salvage team found correspondences in one of the trunks, letters discussing a meeting aboard the ship between several of the wealthiest men on Earth at the time. They were planning a financial alliance that would have given them unprecedented control over global markets. And 3 of the most outspoken critics of that alliance just happened to be passengers on the Titanic. Marcus blinked. The implication was chilling. "You're saying the sinking wasn't an accident?" Whitaker looked back toward the heavily guarded platform. "I'm saying the truth scares powerful people, and now that the truth has surfaced, they're scrambling to smother it again." As Whitaker walked away, Marcus felt the storm inside him begin to rage. He paced the deck of his boat, fists tightening and relaxing with each breath. He thought about the creditors who called him every week, about the fear in Aisha's eyes when they discussed money, about his children who deserved a future better than the one he had. He thought about his father, how he calmed a young Marcus during storms by teaching him to respect the sea, but never to fear it. Marcus realized now that the ocean was not the most dangerous force in his life. It was the men who thought they owned the world. Later that afternoon, a man in a tailored suit approached him near the fueling station. He introduced himself as a representative for one of the private corporations assisting in the recovery. His smile was thin and polished. He spoke with the smooth precision of someone accustomed to getting exactly what he wanted. "I'm here to offer you something very generous," the man said, sliding a crisp document across a table. "A settlement. Compensation for your role in this discovery. A very, very generous compensation." Marcus didn't need to read the paper to understand what it meant. It was a bribe, a silencing fee, a price tag for his absence. "What do you want me to sign away?" Marcus asked quietly. "Your rights as discoverer, your demands for involvement in further research, and, frankly, your presence here," the man replied. "This has become a matter far beyond your expertise." Marcus stared at the page. Restlessness boiled inside him. The man continued, his voice slick as oil. "Take the money. Secure your family's future. This is the smart choice, Mr. Johnson. You don't need to entangle yourself in the affairs of giants." Marcus lifted his eyes and met the man's gaze head-on. "I'm not scared of giants," he said. The man's smile withered. He reached into his briefcase, removed a card, and placed it on the table. "You should be," he said quietly. When Marcus turned to look at the card, the man was already walking away, disappearing into the maze of containers and security fencing. The card bore nothing more than a phone number and initials Marcus recognized from the very documents Whitaker had described. That realization sent a shiver down his spine. He pocketed the card, not as a lifeline, but as proof. Proof that the fight for truth had begun. The following days grew darker. News outlets who had previously praised Marcus now ran carefully worded pieces suggesting he overstated his involvement, implying that the sonar malfunction might have caused him confusion, that credit belonged to the institutions now in charge. Online commenters called him an opportunist, a liar looking to profit off a tragedy. His phone rang constantly, not with congratulations, but with reporters demanding comment on scandals he didn't understand. A coordinated discrediting campaign. He confronted Whitaker again, desperate for answers. Whitaker confessed that documents confirming Marcus as the initial discoverer had mysteriously gone missing from the official record. "They're erasing you," he warned, piece by piece. Marcus returned home that evening feeling hollow, his identity slipping like sand through his fingers. Aisha hugged him silently, sensing the exhaustion radiating from him. But their children's laughter, still bright and innocent, reminded him what he stood to lose if he stopped fighting. He made a decision that night. He would not give up. He would hold on to the truth with both hands and drag it into the light if he had to. He owed that to the memory of those who died in that icy water. He owed it to history. He owed it to himself. But he had no idea how far the shadow of that vault extended. Not yet. Not until the first real threat bared its teeth. It came quietly, in the dead of night. A scraping sound outside. Marcus rose from bed, heartbeat pounding. When he opened the door, a single warning greeted him. A stone placed neatly atop his doorstep, a piece of paper bound around it with twine. He unwrapped it with trembling fingers. Leave the past buried, or we will bury you with it. No signature, no clues, just a cold promise. Marcus looked down at the stone, his hands shaking. The message was clear. He had chosen to stand against the giants, and they had noticed. He lifted his gaze toward the harbor lights flickering in the distance where men worked feverishly to secure the vault's secrets before the world could discover them. He whispered to the night, "I won't be silenced." It didn't matter if they saw him as a fisherman, a nobody. He knew the truth now, and the truth had chosen him. The discovery of the century had become a battlefield, and Marcus Johnson had no intention of surrendering. Night settled heavily over Port Hamilton, but Marcus could not sleep. The warning left on his doorstep had cracked something open inside him. Not fear, though fear was certainly there, humming like a taut wire, but a deeper awareness of the stakes he had stumbled into. It was no longer just about a shipwreck or hidden wealth. It was about the kinds of men who believed they could carve the world into their own private kingdom and would destroy anyone who got too close to their foundations. Marcus had seen storms at sea, the kind that could swallow a boat without hesitation, but this human storm felt somehow worse. The ocean drowned the body. These people drowned the soul. Aisha urged him to stay inside for the rest of the night, to lock the doors and wait for sunrise. He held her close, feeling the warmth of her skin and the tremble she tried to hide. The children slept peacefully, unaware that their father's discovery had painted a target on their home. Marcus lay awake on the living room couch, staring at the ceiling and listening for any sound out of place. He'd always felt safe on land, even during hurricanes and blackouts. But now the shadows outside felt inhabited. He dozed off only when exhaustion overcame vigilance. The next morning, he made his way back to the harbor. He expected eyes on him, but none turned his way. The guards at the docks glanced past him as if he no longer existed. Workers busied themselves unloading crates, ignoring him. It was as though he had become a ghost, present but intentionally unseen. This invisibility only confirmed Whitaker's warning. Someone had begun the process of pushing him out of the story entirely. Marcus walked past the barricades up to the edge of the restricted area, looking out across the water toward the floating platform. Even from this distance, he could see the vault was now surrounded by double the usual security. Whitaker approached him there, keeping his voice low and glancing often over his shoulder. "They're tightening control. Last night they loaded several trunks onto a helicopter. They claimed it was for secure analysis, but I overheard two coordinators arguing. Those trunks weren't supposed to leave the site without authorization." Marcus felt his jaw tighten. "So they're stealing pieces of it already?" Whitaker hesitated. "I can't prove that, but they're moving fast, too fast, as if they expect pushback." He sighed. "You should be careful, Marcus. These people are not used to being questioned. And I'm not used to being pushed around." Marcus replied, though saying it didn't ease his unease. Whitaker's eyes softened. I know, but you're putting yourself in their crosshairs. As they spoke, a team of divers and technicians assembled near the platform's edge. The plan for the day appeared to revolve around attempting to crack the massive institutional bank vaults built into the recovered chamber. Marcus hadn't forgotten Whitaker's words from earlier. Those vaults might contain the most explosive documents of all: financial agreements, government correspondences, and collusion evidence that had been sealed away since 1912. That meant the people who now controlled the operation would stop at nothing to keep those vaults closed, or, if they opened, to control every page that emerged from them. Marcus left Whitaker and boarded the Annabelle, keeping close enough to the platform to observe but far enough not to be harassed. The wind picked up, rattling the loose metal on the small vessel. The sky was clear, the kind of crisp blue that normally brought calm to Marcus's heart, but today the air felt sharp and unfriendly. As the cut-in began on the first banking vault, Marcus noticed a group of men in expensive suits watching from a closed-off section of the platform. They weren't researchers or engineers. Their presence alone was a warning. One man in particular, tall with a severe expression, kept his gaze fixed on the vault door. Marcus recognized him. He was the same man who had approached him days earlier with the settlement offer. The man's neutral stare, unblinking and unhuman, made Marcus shiver. The vault cutting halted abruptly when sparks erupted in an unexpected burst, forcing the workers to retreat. The steel was thicker than anticipated, reinforced heavily, perhaps modified after the ship's original construction. Marcus wondered if the added reinforcements had been the result of paranoia. What secrets had those bankers and aristocrats been so determined to safeguard that they commissioned a vault worthy of a fortress? The suits conferred quickly, their voices sharp and urgent. Marcus couldn't hear the words, but he could see the tension in their posture. The vault held something they desperately wanted, or desperately feared, perhaps both. He spent the next several hours watching divers and technicians work tirelessly to stabilize the vault area. Meanwhile, whispers continued to spread among the lower-level workers, rumors of missing records, arguments among officials, an unexplained delay in reporting to international oversight committees. Someone even mentioned that an offshore bank had sent representatives to demand access to the vault, representatives who supposedly had no legal jurisdiction in the operation. The sense of chaos beneath the surface grew thicker, like an undertow waiting to drag someone under. Marcus returned to his home that evening, the sun setting behind him in fiery streaks. As he approached the front door, he noticed something odd. Aisha, standing at the window, clutching the curtain tightly. Her eyes were wide, her lips set in a trembling line. When he stepped inside, she rushed toward him, trying to stay composed but failing. "There was a man outside earlier," she whispered. "He just stood across the street, watching the house. When I looked at him, he walked away, but he came back an hour later." Marcus felt cold spread through his chest like ice in deep water. He hugged her gently, but his mind spun. The warning on the doorstep had not been symbolic. It had been a promise. He spent that night sitting on the porch with a kitchen knife tucked behind the arm of the chair. Ridiculous protection against the kind of people who left threats like the one he received, but it gave him enough courage to withstand the long hours until dawn. He caught no sight of the watcher again, though every shift of wind made him tense. By morning, Marcus knew he had to act. He couldn't just wait for someone to make good on their threat. And he couldn't rely solely on Whitaker, who was equally vulnerable. He needed evidence, real evidence of what was happening behind those closed doors. He spent most of the day shadowing the platform from his boat, pretending to fish or adjust the engine when guards came too close. His eyes were fixed on the workers who transported containers between the vault and the main research vessel. Something about the way they handled one particular set of containers caught his attention. No labels, no visible markings, and carried only at night. He watched as two guards escorted a sealed metal case up the narrow gangplank. Then he saw Whitaker arguing with a representative of one of the banks. The conversation looked heated. The banker gestured aggressively toward the platform, and Whitaker backed away, his face pale. When Marcus later caught up with him, Whitaker said nothing at first. He simply stared at the water, shaking his head. "They're going to destroy some of the documents," he finally admitted. "They claim they're too damaged to preserve, but they're lying. I saw the boxes being moved." Marcus clenched his fists. Rage and disbelief surged through him. How can they get away with this? "Because they have the authority," Whitaker answered bitterly. "And the money, and the influence. People like me are just participants. People like you," he trailed off, pained. "People like you aren't even that." The words stung, but Marcus knew Whitaker wasn't trying to insult him. He was telling him the truth as it existed in the minds of those in power. Marcus was a fisherman who had unintentionally exposed a century-old conspiracy of wealth and influence. Men with everything to lose had everything to gain by shutting him out. Later that afternoon, an accident, or what was declared an accident, occurred near one of the cranes. A heavy beam fell, narrowly missing a group of workers. Though no one was injured, the timing made Marcus uneasy. Too many coincidences. Too many moments designed to distract or confuse. People whispered about sabotage, but no one dared say it aloud, not with so many wealthy interests standing at the edges like predators guarding a kill. Marcus was growing more certain by the hour. He had to secure proof himself, something undeniable, something that couldn't be erased, rewritten, or buried. That chance came unexpectedly when a young researcher approached him on the dock. Her breath quickened, her eyes darting anxiously. She said she'd seen documents removed from the site, documents that explained in chilling detail how the sealed section of the Titanic was constructed specifically for clandestine cargo. She handed Marcus a flash drive hidden inside her glove. "I can't keep this," she whispered. "They're monitoring everything, but I saw your interviews before they shut you out. You actually care about the truth. Please, just do something with it." And then she walked away before he could even ask her name. Marcus hid the drive in his jacket and hurried home. Aisha had taken the children to her sister's house for the night, fearing another visit from the mysterious watcher. The house felt painfully empty. Marcus locked the doors, checked the windows, then plugged the flash drive into his laptop. What he found stole the breath from his lungs. Blueprints for the hidden vault, stamped with initials of notorious banking dynasties. Letters between wealthy passengers who had argued over who would control the vault's contents upon arrival in New York. Documentation that suggested a deliberate effort to obscure the section's existence from both ship inspectors and the general public, and worse, an internal memo from 1911 discussing the contingency of catastrophic loss, which mentioned plans to ensure the vault would survive even if the ship did not. Marcus sat frozen at the screen, horror creeping down his spine. These documents didn't prove the Titanic had been sunk intentionally, But they did prove that the vault's designers had considered the possibility of disaster and had prepared for it. That alone would have been enough to ignite scandal even 100 years after the fact. Before he could process what to do next, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number appeared. "Stop digging. Consider this your final warning." Marcus's heart pounded. They knew he had the documents, or at least suspected. He turned off the phone, pulled the flash drive free, and stared at it. It was small enough to swallow, yet heavy enough to topple empires. He could hide it, copy it, leak it, or use it as leverage. But whatever decision he made had to be immediate and irreversible. That night, he paced his living room, wrestling with his dread. The house felt like a breathing thing, full of tension and unseen watchers. Every knock of a loose shutter, every groan of the windows made him jump. Outside, the wind howled around the corners, but beneath that sound he imagined the low hum of a car engine idling nearby, waiting. He knew one thing for certain. The fight was no longer about his pride or credit for the discovery. It was about survival. His, and perhaps the truth's as well. He couldn't force the men in suits to stop tearing out pages of history. He couldn't make the world care about what had been hidden, but he could make sure the truth did not go quietly into the dark. Whatever happened next would decide if he remained a fisherman, or became something else entirely. And the closed vaults aboard the platform, still sealed behind thick walls, felt like the heartbeat of a terrible secret waiting to break free. Marcus wasn't sure if he'd live long enough to see that happen. Marcus hardly remembered the moment when exhaustion finally dragged him under. It had been hours of pacing, staring through dark windows, imagining threats behind every shifting shadow. When he awoke, daylight leaked weakly into the living room and the laptop still lay open on the coffee table. The flash drive rested where he left it, a tiny fragment of metal capable of igniting catastrophes. His neck was stiff from an awkward angle on the couch, and his heartbeat still thudded with the unsettled rhythm of fear. He sat up slowly, rubbing a hand over his face, feeling the rough stubble and the weight pressing down on him like seawater. Aisha had sent a message. She and the children were staying another day with her sister. She urged him to be careful, to stay near the docks where the crowds might deter whoever was watching. Her words were full of unspoken terror. Marcus typed a quick response, reassuring her that everything was under control, though every part of him recognized the lie. Nothing was under control anymore. The truth he carried was a knife he couldn't sheath, a blade pointing both ways. He slipped the flash drive into his pocket and left the house. The moment he stepped outside, cold air slapped his skin, and a flock of seagulls cried overhead as though mocking his attempts at courage. He drove to the harbor, his eyes scanning mirrors constantly. The world outside moved with everyday normalcy. Cars, children, shopkeepers, but Marcus had crossed an invisible threshold. He was inside a reality where danger lurked behind politeness, and a knock at the door could arrive with death standing behind it. When he reached the docks, he found Whitaker already waiting, shoulders hunched against the wind. The scientist looked like he too had not slept. Dark circles under his eyes made him appear older. He offered a tight nod. "We need to talk somewhere private," Marcus said. Whitaker tensed. "Did something happen?" Marcus hesitated only a second. "They know I have partial copies of the documents." The color drained from Whitaker's face. He swallowed hard and gestured for Marcus to follow him into the shadows cast by a stack of metal shipping containers. The harbor noise fell away slightly there, muffled by thick steel walls. Still, Whitaker leaned in close. "You shouldn't have taken anything," he whispered urgently. "They'll retaliate now. They can't afford loose ends, especially not loose ends with proof." "What should I have done?" Marcus countered, voice trembling with anger and fear. "Let them burn everything while I sit and watch? They already erased me from their reports. They're already threatening my family." Whitaker's jaw worked as though struggling to find words. "You have to understand. Some of the people involved, these families, these institutions, have shaped the world for a century. This discovery threatens to expose the foundations of their wealth. They won't let that happen. So, what do I do? Hide? Run?" Marcus demanded. "No," Whitaker answered, and the unexpected sharpness in his voice startled Marcus. "You bring the truth into the light so bright that they can't dim it." "How?" Marcus asked. Whitaker took a deep breath. "Public exposure. You publish everything at once. You leak it to every outlet. The big ones, the independents, international agencies. Make it impossible to bury." The idea illuminated Marcus's mind with equal parts promise and peril. Releasing the truth could protect him, or it could guarantee retribution. But Whitaker wasn't finished. "There's more," he said, his gaze shifting nervously across the open harbor. "The Commission intends to close off access to the vault completely by the end of the week. They'll claim preservation concerns and national security. After that, no one will ever see what's inside again." Marcus's chest tightened. "You said the Commission? Who exactly?" Whitaker didn't answer with names. He didn't have to. Marcus already understood. The men who had approached him, the ones in perfectly pressed suits that cost more than his boat, they were the power behind the operation now. They were the ones who had crafted the new narrative of the Titanic discovery, one where Marcus Johnson barely existed. Whitaker sighed heavily. If there's a chance to stop them, it's now. After the official closure, everything gets locked in legal red tape. The truth will vanish. Marcus looked out across the water toward the platform. Workers and guards swarmed around the structure. The vault doors remained untouched, sealed behind layers of security. But the trunks and safe contents already seized represented only a fraction of the truth. The deepest secrets were still hidden in that sealed bank vault. And whoever controlled that vault controlled the narrative of history, and potentially the future. "What if we get inside?" Marcus said, before fully realizing he'd spoken. Whitaker blinked in alarm. "Marcus, no, this is not a movie. There are security teams, cameras." "I'm not talking about breaking in." Marcus clenched his fists. "I'm talking about seeing with my own eyes what's inside before they close it forever. If I witness it and record it, they can't erase me." Whitaker shook his head. "That's impossible. They won't even let me near it anymore, and I'm supposed to be the lead scientific consultant." Marcus leaned closer. "That's why they won't suspect us. They think I'm neutralized, invisible." Whitaker stared at him, weighing the madness of the plan. He rubbed his forehead. "What you're suggesting, it could get us arrested, or worse." Marcus's voice steadied. "They've already threatened worse." The silence that followed was long and suffocating. Seagulls cried again overhead, their voices echoing across the water like warnings. Then, finally, Whitaker nodded once, slow but decisive. "All right," he whispered. "Then we act before it's too late." They parted there, each retreating to maintain appearances. Marcus boarded the Annabelle and pretended to check the nets while his pulse hammered. Soon, Whitaker signaled from another vessel, indicating he would distract the platform guards under pretense of delivering a technical assessment. Marcus knew he had a slim window. He set the boat in a slow circle near the platform, appearing casual, just another local fisherman who had no real business here. When Whitaker engaged the guards and project managers, gesturing dramatically at a console and arguing loudly about misaligned calibration, the distraction worked. Security focus shifted, and Marcus seized the moment. He slipped over the side of his boat into the chill water. It stabbed his skin like thousands of needles, but adrenaline propelled him forward. He swam beneath the lip of the platform, avoiding spotlights that swept the surface. His fingers found a ladder fixed to the side of the floating structure. He climbed quietly, muscles aching with the strain. When he reached the platform deck, he crouched low behind crates of equipment. Workers nearby shouted over the whine of machinery. He moved steadily, cautiously, using every moment of noise as cover. The vault doors loomed ahead, tall, steel, imposing. Their presence seemed to pulse through the air as though history itself was locked inside, pounding faintly from the other side. Marcus reached the doorway just as two workers left, rolling a sealed container down a ramp. He ducked inside before another guard turned his head. His heart thundered in his ears. He found himself in a corridor of steel beams and temporary lamps clipped to railings. Then, at the end of the narrow passage, he saw it, the banking vault. Up close, it was even more terrifying. Reinforced metal, centuries ahead of the technology that should have existed at the Titanic's launch. Intricate locking mechanisms, plates engraved with bank insignias. It looked less like part of a ship and more like the treasure heart of an empire. Marcus approached slowly, one step at a time, his breath shallow. Suddenly he froze, a faint shifting sound behind him. He whipped around, expecting the barrel of a gun. Whitaker emerged instead, panting, drenched in sweat. I distracted them as long as I could. We don't have much time. Marcus nodded, unsure whether to be relieved or even more terrified. Together, they stepped toward the vault. Whitaker pulled from his coat a small device, something like a handheld scanner. We don't need to open it. We just need to document everything we can about it, every detail to prove what's here, and hope that's enough to force transparency. But before the device could scan, the platform shook violently. Lights flickered. A loud crash reverberated through the chamber. "What was that?" Marcus whispered urgently. Then a voice boomed over loudspeakers, security calling emergency lockdown procedures. They had discovered the breach. Marcus's skin went cold. Whitaker grabbed his arm. "We have to go, now." Marcus glanced back at the vault. He hadn't captured proof yet. Nothing that would convince the world that this monstrous thing existed and that it concealed a truth everyone deserved to know. He reached for his phone, snapping a single photo, even as alarms wailed. They ran. Marcus's wet shoes slid against the metal flooring. More shutters shook the structure as guards rushed in. They leapt down the ladder into the icy water just as flashlights sliced across the platform deck. The cold crushed Marcus's lungs, but he kicked hard, desperate. They reached the Annabelle, hauling themselves aboard. Marcus jammed the throttle forward, and the engine sputtered before catching, sending the boat chugging away from the immediate danger while angry shouts followed them. They didn't stop until the platform had shrunk to a dark silhouette behind them. Marcus collapsed onto the deck, chest burning, hands trembling. Whitaker leaned against the rail, gasping. They stared at each other, the enormity of what they had just done settling over them like a leaden shroud. "Did you get anything?" Whitaker finally managed. Marcus pulled the phone from his pocket. It dripped seawater, but still glowed. He opened the photo. The vault, etched with history's most powerful symbols, towering like a tomb built for truth itself. It was evidence. Not enough, maybe, but a beginning. And Marcus felt a certainty settle into his bones, cold and unyielding. They had crossed a line. There would be no turning back. Whitaker broke the silence. If they realize what we know, you understand, they won't stop. Marcus nodded. And I won't stop either. The scientist looked out over the water, the breeze ruffling his soaked clothing. Be careful, Marcus. You've become more than a witness now. You're a threat. Marcus stared at the horizon. The sun was lowering again, casting a trail of orange fire across the sea. For the first time since the discovery, he understood the full truth. The ocean had kept the Titanic's secrets for more than a century, not to protect the dead, but to guard the living from what those secrets could unleash. Now that gate was open. Marcus clenched his jaw. He would not let the truth be buried a second time. If you want to uncover more shocking secrets from the depths of history, make sure to subscribe now. Don't miss the next stories where mysteries come to life and hidden truths are revealed. Share this video with friends and tell us in the comments where you're watching from, because the world needs to see this. Stay tuned for the next discovery that will leave you speechless.